for Grassroots, which I think it's actually run with Shreshti and UNICEF. Yep. There we go, this one here. If you were really keen, you could go along. I'm actually going to be a mentor for the students who are working on those projects, so they come. And there's a whole bunch of different things that people are making. That's $100, if you didn't know, so that's how much it costs. So, so yeah, so there is a summer school if you're really keen and you were going to India anyway and you didn't mind spending another $100. There's something happening there. So, and as I say, I don't think I'll go personally, but I'll be mentoring some of the students, doing some work with them via Skype, and to keep on the lookout because we're organising or preparing anyway a study abroad. I am to lead one at the end of the year to India. So we'll see how that goes. So that'll be another option. And if we go, Anil will organise a similar school for my program. So, yeah. Bunker Roy, there's a YouTube clip on the site as well. So he's the guy who put together the Barefoot College, and he spoke recently in Melbourne. Bunker Roy did. I just put the YouTube clip there of the program. It's quite interesting and inspirational to see what he did, how it's focused particularly on women, on poor women, how they're trained and how the whole model works. And I think, you know, India in general, it's interesting. There are a few examples of these sorts of, they always say Gandhian, and if you know anything about Gandhi, his model of sort of, or his view of decentralized development is very much part of a lot of initiatives in India, where you have, typically you have some charismatic individual, like Bunker Roy, or other people, and they'll set up something that is quite sort of distinct. And in this case, it's often training older women to be entrepreneurial, manage solar and things like that. So, an interesting story there. Anyway, I thought I would mention that. Well, where are we? Oh, it's back to here. So, but today in the tutorial, though, as I said, will be a chance to make sure everything's in shape for next week, and that's really the main thing in terms of your presentation and everything else. So really, that's the main thing, no extra info. And just thinking today mostly about the communication aspects of that, which is what this is about. So, by communication, I mean how to be persuasive next week, both in terms of what you say and what you write. What? Oh, okay. So just a few points here. My photocopier in the office wasn't working, so I'm afraid I don't have a copy, but you can download this. So, communicating design thinking, yeah? So this is thinking, as I say, thinking ahead to next week, both written and spoken communication. So how do we do that? What are some of the good ways? And you might have thought, you know, as you've listened to me lecture, that I could do with some lessons as well. But anyway, we'll come back to that. Communicating. So what principles of communication matter? How should we present our project? And how do we balance persuasion and information? That's the key thing here. Because I've said to you that as far as the presentation goes in week 12, it's very much about persuading someone that you've worked through the process, you've got evidence for some of the ideas and claims that you make, that you've developed a business canvas, sort of business model, not a business plan, so you want to communicate that to someone who could fund it. And so balancing persuasion and information, or persuasion and justification, I suppose. Because we can be persuasive, of course, but if we don't have any evidence for that, then it's just opinion. So we do need to demonstrate why we think what we think. Now, so as I mentioned to some of you, I think there are a number of tools out there for telling the story of what you're doing, and one of them is PowerToon, which is what this is from. It's a simple visual PowerToon. I always forget the name actually. PowerToon or PowerToon, one of the two. It's a free sort of scenario builder and cartoon thing where you can tell the story of what you're doing or what you're proposing. This is just a screenshot of an example. And of course, so narrating the story of what you figured out and where it's going. Of course, you can do that with text, but visuals and in particular storylines like this can be even more powerful, particularly when you're trying to persuade and illustrate what's happening. So when we talk about narration, we talk about storytelling in say design thinking or project approaches, it is good to have a coherent story for that to be persuasive, but there is significant advantage in that sort of setting with having a story. And that comes up in some of the tools individually. So storyboarding, for example, even customer journeys. So there are many different types of story-oriented tools that you've met so far, and which can sort of help pay off and help tell that story. So individually, stories matter, and then overall, as a sort of persuasive presentation, you want a storyline to run through it as well. You know that for example, the design thinking process or the human-centered design process has its own story wave, if you like, takes you through those phases. So throughout much of what you've done and what you can do, that notion of storyline is important. So as I said, and you know this already, the human-centered design or the design thinking approach itself has a story, has a storyline, which you follow through from inspiration to ideation to implementation. There's a logic to that. There's a drive forward in that, and so telling that story. We talk about this needing to balance persuasion and information. Essentially, the persuasive content of next week is that you have a good idea, that you've researched it, that you have the sort of pegs in the ground, and this would be worth doing. It would create impact. We talk about persuading, persuading about what? Not just persuading that you have a good idea, but persuading also that there is a social impact that would be achieved by this. And so you've got that component, and underlying it, essentially, from your point of view, from an information point of view, if you like, is a process you've gone through with moments and tools that you've applied to get you through this. And that tells me that you followed process and have come to a reasonable, a good solution or proposal, at the end. So, and I've said to you also that while the report is a chance to tell through text what you've done, plus with diagrams. In the presentation next week, staying visual, not exclusively visual, but largely visual, is a nice contrast with the report. So being diagrams, images, keeping that communication visual to persuade is going to be helpful. So, and remembering also, so this is just about reminders. Most of the things, think about the underlying, if you think about the underlying storylines to many of the tools that you've used or dimensions of any project, which I've mentioned before, scenario storyboards, customer journeys, they all have journey elements or story elements. So does a business canvas. A business model canvas, which is not a business plan, once you get into the plan stage, it's numbers, it's a full list of numbers, it's a 3-year time frame and all sorts of things. But stepping back from that, at the level of model, at the level of the canvas, this is also a story. This is a story with, the different elements that make it happen. This is a story focused on customers, customer relationships. This is a story driven by a value proposition. This is a story in which on a daily or weekly basis there are key activities. That's the everyday of the story. Partners have a role, costs, resources, and so on. So the business model canvas has its own, is itself a story. And it's a model precisely because it visualizes those elements in a single kind of a landscape. And so trying to communicate that as well is really important. Yeah. What is the vision of that? And one way of doing that, there are various ways of converting those facts into a convincing story is just a typical day in the new business, where you can show how these different factors play a role, how they come out, how they come together. Oops. Yeah. So and again, although the final report is less sort of visual compared to your presentation and pitch next week, report structures and academic writing in general, or scholarly writing in general, is also about telling stories, because report structures, journal articles, books, and so on and so forth, they have a flow, they have a structure that leads from sort of a background to a problem solution, to a process to address that problem, and to an outcome as a result of that process. There's a drive from the beginning of figuring this out to proposing, to identifying the problem, to addressing the problems through certain processes, and to reaching an outcome and justifying that along the way. So although the report also is probably not as picturesque as your presentation, it has its own driving sort of narrative. And you should always spell check your stories and not write form when you mean from. So detail also matters. So although when you develop and present your report, you will be more textual, also think about the sort of compelling logic that you're trying to deliver, following that structure, driving towards that. And I have to say, in my years of experience as a journal editor and journal reviewer or book reviewer and all those sorts of things, one of the things I'm always reading for when somebody submits something is that compelling narrative. And sometimes, more often than not, I get sent stuff that feels like treading water. So people are just kind of not going anywhere, not taking the argument forward, not taking the story forward. We're just kind of standing in water. So it is important to have that ongoing push in your story, the next stage, solving problems, addressing problems, and taking a balanced approach. As I yes, it's going to be a short one today, intentionally. So this week, so the tutorial today, especially evaluation of draft presentations, put them in front of me. I'm going to come around and talk to you and see where they're up to and give you as much input as I can so that next week is as compelling as possible. Evaluating draft reports as well. Whatever you've got, whatever structures, thoughts you've had, that's also what we'll be looking at today, just to make sure again on Friday when those go in that I'm impressed and therefore you get a good mark. Completing testing and live prototyping. We're in the final stages here. These last 2 weeks is a chance to get what you've got out there, get some feedback, and demonstrate that what you've produced could work, does work, as far as you're able, and just ensuring that you've met the criterion rules. So, very much this week, at least today, is ticking all those boxes, so that, as I say, so that you get the best result possible next week. That's it, really. Unless you've got some questions right now. I mean, I'll see you in the tutorial. But what did you miss? No, you missed me talking about the announcements that I've put up. That's all. Yeah. Oh, and just a quick reminder. Thanks to those, I sent an email. Thanks to everybody who's done a course evaluation. That's good. But I'd like more. So as many as possible, and then just a quick email, I've done it, or I've done you could be more specific, I've done the survey. And then I can, that will help me, yeah? That'd be good. Anybody needs to tick this, please do.
the 1,500 word one.
Oh, yep.
So the abstract would be the brief, which I'm still writing.
Yep.
This is basically, I wanted a summary of all of the lectures.
Oh, that,
Yeah,
yep.
so that's basically what I've waded through.
Yep.
But what I'm talking about the story, what I do once I've written the brief, I'm actually then inserting the story and how it applies to us and wrapping it up at the end.
Yep.
But what I want to know is, can I break this up with text and pictures to illustrate what I'm talking, or do you want it just as the text at the beginning of the report?
I think here especially, so some images are helpful where they're helpful to communicate. So, for example, the simple wave thing. So there are some sort of one or two diagrams or images that sort of help communicate what you're saying.
All right.
Yeah.
I'd like to break up a bit. But
yeah.
If you have a minute, I know you've got
And
a
the
class.
and
Do
the
you want to
and the
take
the
that?
heuristic, the funnel, for
Exactly,
example.
yeah.
If you're going to talk about it, and
Yeah.
then there are a couple of images which really
But yes,
sort
it's
of
taken me a long time to try and condense it down.
yeah, no, well, but it's no,
I
and
think you
that's
wanted us to mirror back to you that we understood what you
Yep.
were talking about. So
correct. And this is the
please
this is
feel
the
free
challenge.
to get a red pen out. And, go
I
for it.
will. I will review it. Yeah,
Thanks.
that's good. Yeah. Okay. See you later.
Thank you.
Okay. Right. Sorry? There's no
I hope there's no ghosts in here.
ghosts. Oh yes. Students who got trapped in time or something. Huh. So what are you doing apart from this subject?
I'm finishing my film degree.
Oh right, okay.
Yeah.
Oh okay. So did you just have some electives and you?
Yeah.
Oh right.
But I've been looking at it as like a design innovation and it's a master's degree.
Yep.
It's kind of like these kind of ideas.
Oh right. The strategy, I think it's called.
Yeah. And I'm kind of thinking of
Maybe doing that.
Do you
Hmm.
know
I taught a bit into it, and yeah, look, it could be interesting for you if you think. So F and TV is what you've done, yeah.
Yeah.
And what about? Why does that sort of appeal? I mean, what?
I guess I'm just trying to figure out how to use that because the industry is so big and there's so
Yeah.
many, and it's going in so many different directions
Yeah.
right now. I'm just wondering, I want to be able to use it in a way that's more effective than just making a web series or
Yeah, yeah,
just trying to figure out how to make the industry
yeah,
more of a real world impact.
yeah. I'll tell you one thing that there is a dearth of, and I see some of it, but it's not as well done as it could be. So there are exciting innovations. I suppose some of them are sort of social innovations and things like that. But there are very few good documentaries about them.
Yeah, right.
Now, and my daughter's got some friends in Nepal who've been doing that sort of thing as well, as a sort of as a move on from studying film and things like that. But that's an interesting angle, I think. Just if you already have, film and TV skills.
Yeah.
And one thing I've always wondered about, just a question of having time and energy and all that sort of stuff. I've always been a secret admirer of mobile phone docos.
Yeah.
So,
Is there a big, is there a lot of those out there?
well, the interesting thing is because the capabilities of these get better and better, and because they're so mobile. In fact, I'm a big fan of these for research
Yeah.
in all sorts of ways, and I've got various tools on here that I use to do that. But there is of course, there's a mobile, film sort of, movement, if you like.
Sure.
But the idea of so two things. The idea of somebody like you, let's say, setting this up and creating a 15-minute or something film of, whatever's happening, or handing over participatory, participatory film. So all of that, because that has a bit of a tradition in India.
Yeah. With the traditional way.
So coming out of the sort of the early 90s, I suppose, or 80s, there was this idea of participatory. There was a whole move towards participatory sort of democracy and participatory development and things like that. There was a whole series of things happening. The World Bank had made a big deal out of it and all that sort of stuff. So people started getting into this idea of forgetting mobile phones for a moment, but this idea of handing over. So you'd have farmers and women and whatever who would be kind of trained, and they would organise the films, and then they would be put together, and then they would be, right. So you had that handover idea.
Yeah.
But taking it further now with, smartphones, is
It's a lot more accessible.
yeah, exactly. A lot more accessible, affordable, and just real interesting, because in that capacity, if you had the right sort of training and maybe just a few experiences, it could be a real niche.
Yeah. Probably be showing people that really showing.
Yeah, and then you collaborate in it. Typically you'd want to do it in a team,
Yeah.
and that would get you, apart from anything, it would get you travelling. So I have, I do some teaching in Colombia. So I'm probably going back there again in July. And many of the research projects in Colombia, and I'm in the south, in Manizales, a number of them are visual ethnographies.
Visually what?
Visual ethnographies.
Okay.
Which essentially is, so ethnography is about life and culture. And typically it's done, by people like myself who go somewhere and spend time and try to figure out how this will work here. But with visual ethnography, then films play a much bigger role now. So you have that Barefoot College, Bangalore thing. The Barefoot College, I went 3 years ago and watched a doco which traced a woman and a family through that journey, and her going back to her village afterwards. It was really good. It was one of the film festivals, won some award or something. And I saw another one, actually, got another one. So I've seen good work, and it's pretty powerful, it draws people in.
Yeah. It's a voice and social media.
Yeah, because